Howdy y'all, my name is Dave. This is the Anime Field Guide podcast, and you're listening to the Studio Rundown. This is my series where I take you through the history and business practices of anime production houses across Japan. Today's tale concerns a former industry giant, GAINAX. And before we begin, I'd like to give a special thanks to Dark Cat for the theme music. This is Lover's Oasis, courtesy of Upbeat for making the song available. Give Dark Cat some love over on Spotify as well. There are truly very few origin stories as unique as GAINAX Studio. Our story begins in Osaka in 1980, where a group of nerds attending Osaka University of the Arts applied to host the Japan Sci-Fi Convention. This convention got a new nickname every year based on the city it was hosted, and the two prior events in Osaka had been dubbed Daikon. This is a pun using the kanji to spell Osaka and a combination with the Japanese radish, hence Daikon. So 1981's convention was therefore dubbed Daikon 3. The leaders of this crew were Yasuhiro Takeda and Toshio Okada, and they are the first of our two eventual studio founders. And at this time, they decided that their convention, the Daikon 3, needed an animated short as part of the opening ceremonies. Yasuhiro Takeda has been heavily involved in science fiction organizations for writing and conventions. He's met and befriended Toshio Okada back in 1978 at the sci-fi convention SetoCon. He went on to be the animation producer for Gurren Lagann, Nadia, Evangelion, Gunbuster, basically everything GAINAX. Toshio Okada, again, he's the Ota King. It was a nickname given to him by his fellows for being the authority on otaku culture. He would serve as GAINAX's first president before leaving the company in 1992, and he has published many papers and has become basically the authority figure on otaku culture as well as a part-time university lecturer. So these two guys reached out to a local fan, Hideaki Anno, after hearing that Anno knew how to animate. Anno was then joined by fellow co-founders Takami Akai and Hiroyuki Yamaga, and the production of the Daikon 3 short film commenced out of a small room attached to a factory owned by Okada's family. Thus, the group Daikon Film was born. This 5.5-minute short film is about a little girl who fends off monsters, giant robots, and spaceships across classic and contemporary science fiction, everything from Godzilla and Ultraman, Star Wars, Star Trek, Space Battleship Yamato, Space Runway Ideon, Gundam, you name it, it was probably in there. The production of this short was slapdash and minuscule budget. They were animating on sheets of vinyl to cut costs, and it ran literally to the morning of the convention, but this was truly something special. This short film drew a lot of attention and in a big way. Anno, Yamaga, and Akai were later asked to participate in the production of Superdimensional Fortress Macross over in Tokyo, Anno working on key animation and mech design, Akai worked on character animation team, and Yamaga even got to direct episode 9. Okada and Takeda, meanwhile, undertook a separate venture back in Osaka. They opened a science fiction hobby store that they named General Products. Opened in 1982, sold merchandise and resin model kits or garage kits based on popular sci-fi franchises. General Products was established as an Okada family branch business. It would remain separate from Daikon Film / GAINAX until the two companies officially merged in the early 90s. So the group reconvened for another short film project to open 1983's Daikon 4. This time, they came back with a lot more experience, actual industry experience, more resources and funding. They were further assisted by Macross collaborators, including Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, another eventual GAINAX co-founder. The Daikon 4 film was set to Twilight by Electric Light Orchestra. The girl is now rocking a Playboy bunny suit as she wrestles giant robots. She lightsaber duels Darth Vader. She surfs on the Stormbringer from Michael Moorcock's fantasy novels, flies past spaceships, everything fantasy and Lord of the Rings, American comics, and also features scenes of a city exploding into flower petals and a forest springing from the earth following the arc of a laser beam fired from the Radish spaceship. And it's still one of the most iconic fan animation projects ever produced. Now, naturally, the group had failed to license any of this. They did not have permission to feature the Playboy bunny costume either, so legally they could not make any direct money off the film. However, they skirted these restrictions by including the film reels and laser discs as bonus content with the purchase of art books and related materials, such as the character model kits and such, to get around that whole pesky copyright. So in between and afterwards the Daikon Film Group continued to produce amateur videos, these being mainly live action or tokusatsu parody films, mainly drawing from Ultraman that steadily grew in scope and production value. This is where I'd like to mention another GAINAX co-founder, Shinji Higuchi, he's mainly known for his work in live action as particularly special effects in tokusatsu TV and film, but he did also storyboard various anime series, naturally a bunch of GAINAX shows, and shows that GAINAX helped produce on the side. He was also a key creative figure in planning for Neon Genesis Evangelion, and Higuchi-san is the namesake for Shinji Ikari. He later founded Studio Gonzo with fellow GAINAX staffers in 2000. So the final film by Daikon Film was Orochi Strikes Again. This was released in December of 1985, and this was practically on par with a professional production despite the majority of the crew being volunteers, and even enjoyed a limited theatrical run thanks to the Bandai company, which would go on to have a close working relationship with what would become GAINAX. But of course, we got to back up to around September 1984, where Okada and Takeda began drafting ideas for a proper animation production company, and they had approached Bandai at this time with a proposal for Daikon Film to animate a Mobile Suit Gundam OVA series. But Bandai instead proposed an original science fiction film, as around this time, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind and Macross Do You Remember Love? They were having major box office returns, and Bandai wanted a slice of that good old anime original film pie. And it just so happened that all the Daikon boys helped animate portions of Nausicaa and were involved in Macross at some point. And so on Christmas Eve 1984, Studio GAINAX was officially established and headquartered in Tokyo. The name GAINAX comes from the Orochi film, as it was shot in Takehiro Akai's hometown, where the local Totori dialect Gaina means giant. Put a giant robot X at the end of it, and you get GAINAX. The studio's first president was Toshio Okada before he retired from the company in 1992. GAINAX's first film was The Royal Space Force, The Wings of Oniamis, created and directed by Hiroyuki Yamaga with Hideaki Anno on mech designs and Yoshiyuki Sadamoto on character designs. Some other notable works for Sadamoto as a character design, while I have him here, is naturally Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gunbuster, Nadia, Furikuri, and they even brought him back for Progressive and Alternative with Production IG. It's a Royal Space Force, The Wings of Oniamis. This was a very ambitious film. It was 4 years of production, cost a ton of money, and was released on March 1987 to positive critical reviews, but unfortunately low theatrical returns, although it did make up a lot in the home video market. We didn't get an English release in the US until around 1994. The studio's next project, however, was not as successful. R20, or Route 20, this was to be a dystopian cyberpunk setting featuring some youth biker gangs that ended up only as a pilot film because of twofold: Royal Space Force's low box office returns, the Japanese bubble economy also was bursting in the late 80s, as well as drawing a few similarities to a little film called Akira. Space Force and R20 racked up an impressive debt for this new company. They worked to bring this debt under control by assisting other major studios, but GAINAX also supplemented its income through various commercial work and music videos, as well as developing video games, particularly in the adult market space where they were seeing a bit of a gap. So the first game in this series was Cybernetic High School in 1989. It's a quiz game show where correct answers steadily removed clothing from the girl characters. The next game was Highway Buster, also in 1989. It's also a quiz game, but stripping biker girls this time. The last game in this series was focused on the GAINAX OVA, Aim for the Top Gunbuster. In 1990, they kicked off a card battler game series, Battle Skin Panic, again, also stripping ladies, but it was a card game this time. But they did publish some non-erotic games as well, most notably the Princess Maker series, where the goal was to raise a young girl into a princess who can lead her kingdom to success with over a dozen endings, good and bad, based on choices made during the game. It became a rather popular franchise for the studio. But we got to get back into the anime space. So, of course, the next series produced by GAINAX comes courtesy of Hideaki Anno. He had his directorial debut with 1988's Aim for the Top Gunbuster, a 6-episode OVA series from October 1988 to July of 89. This features a rookie space cadet, Noriko, as she trains to become a robot pilot for interstellar battle against distant alien invaders. Again, Gunbuster was another high-quality series with positive reception, but it ran way over budget and put GAINAX further in the red. Ono followed this up with his next series, Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, releasing in 1990. This was a GAINAX co-production with Group TAC Studio, produced for NHK Broadcasting. This is based loosely on the Jules Verne 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where our characters Nadia and Jean get wrapped up in a grand adventure with Captain Nemo and the Nautilus attempting to thwart a man named Gargoyle from taking over the world with technology repurposed from the ancient Atlanteans. However, once again, this production was particularly plagued at the start with internal conflicts at the top of GAINAX's management, resulting in poor budgeting and an extremely stressful production cycle, putting GAINAX even deeper in the red following Nadia's conclusion, and Ono spiraling into depression from all the stress. In fact, he basically left the industry for a while. In the meantime, NHK held the rights to Nadia, so GAINAX could not directly profit from the Nadia license, but NHK did allow GAINAX to develop and publish a video game series for the Famicom, and it eventually got a bestseller and got some sequels to help offset the losses somewhat. Group TAC even reached out to GAINAX to produce a Nadia movie, and even somehow convinced Ono to return as the director for that. Group TAC even advanced GAINAX 50 million yen for the project, but GAINAX was unable to pay them back until after Evangelion. Although an interesting footnote in the Nadia portion of this episode is that when Disney released Atlantis: The Lost Empire in 2001, various folks, particularly at upper GAINAX management, wanted NHK and Toho companies to sue Disney for plagiarism. The next work by GAINAX was 1991 film Otaku no Video. This is an animation and live-action hybrid, being a soft autobiography of GAINAX's origin, peppered with inside jokes and references that you would expect. And it also has a lot of humorous and biting live-action segment parodies of otaku culture that hit a little bit too close to home. Throughout all of this, however, even though GAINAX was doing very well critically, it just continued to have very low commercial returns and seemed forever poised on the verge of bankruptcy. And this is in large part to just the financial freewheeling and consistent office politics of upper studio management that would consistently undermine all the productions. But all of these bad fortunes also seemed to turn around with the release of 1995's Neon Genesis Evangelion. And its two films, both in 1997, you got a compilation movie, and the film End of Evangelion. Originally began as a direct sequel to Nadia, quickly morphed into the giant robot series with characters experiencing deeply rooted depression and psychosis, mirroring Ono's 4-year depression cycle following the end of Nadia. He just put himself completely into this work. But once again, there was a rough production cycle and poor budgeting just caused GAINAX management to balk at investing in the initial project, which bit them very hard as Evangelion became one of the most iconic anime series ever produced. Even in the middle of its runtime, this anime just completely took off. And even after the controversial first ending at the main of the TV series. So once again, they found themselves in a Nadia situation. The company therefore received no direct returns aside from Ono's director and script royalties until the Eva production committee, particularly King Records, made specific moves to allow GAINAX to cash in on the IP. They basically moved the merchandising window forward. GAINAX produced CD-ROMs, PC games, character goods, you name it. GAINAX just shoved it out there. And thanks to this, for the first time ever, GAINAX was not only turning a profit, but was starting to be able to pay off its long outstanding debts. Coming off the success of Evangelion, however, it was quickly discovered in a financial audit that the same folks at the top who had got them in this situation in the first place had now committed corporate tax evasion. The then president Takashi Sawamura and tax accountant Yoshikatsu Iwasaki were arrested and jailed in 1999 for accounting fraud. The basic gist of the scheme was GAINAX had paid various related companies large fees for assistance and expenses, but then immediately withdrew like 90% of the money from those company accounts as cash and then stored the bills in safe deposit boxes. And this would be far from the only time that the financial mismanagement regarding Evangelion franchise would come back to bite the company. So in the middle of all this, as the studio worked through the Evangelion drama, Ono directed the anime adaptation of Karekano, which is one of the few manga adaptations undertaken by GAINAX. Karekano was produced with JC staff as well. And GAINAX also did a couple of co-productions with Studio Shaft in the 2000s while I'm on the subject. So from 2000 to around 2010, they worked on Maho Romantic, This Ugly Yet Beautiful World, and He Is My Master. And at the turn of the 2000, we have the next big original series Furikuri, the cult classic fourth wall shattering OVA series, co-produced with Production IG. Later the sequels have been almost fully produced by Production IG. This was created and directed by Kazuya Tsurumaki, who also directed the 2004 series Gunbuster 2, also known as Die Buster, but it's Gunbuster 2. This was in celebration of Gainax's 20-year anniversary, and then Gunbuster also got a compilation movie in 2006. And so also around this time, particularly in 2003-ish, direct proceeds from the Evangelion franchise began to dry up. And so Gainax then utilized the Eva brand for pachinko machines, which then picked the proceeds back up significantly. Also in 2005, the company established the Evangelion store, which began selling goods online, eventually creating physical locations as well. Also later in 2010, there was a company named Groundworks that was established by former Gainax folks. Particularly, it was headed by a married couple, Yasuhiro and Noriko Kamimura, and they were the ones who opened the physical storefronts through the 2010s, starting with Tokyo 01. Also around this time, in 2006, of course, Hideaki Anno left Gainax and formed Studio Kara. He'd finally had it with, he'd had a lot of conflicts with Gainax management and was even elevated to the director's board for a time, but he just couldn't, in a couple of interviews later, he said he just couldn't make any of the changes. Nobody listened to try and make things more equitable for the animators under him. So he just left. He finally had enough, and he took with him Kazuya Tsurumaki, and as well as Masayuki, who then would direct the new theatrical versions of Evangelion at Studio Kara that would become known as the Rebuild films. Since Anno remained listed as Eva's creator, Studio Gainax assigned a royalties contract with him and Studio Kara in order to pay him royalties while Gainax maintained its hold on directly commercializing the Eva franchise. Now, with Anno and a good chunk of the creative staff gone in 2006, Gainax then seemed to be on the back foot. But of course, the end of the 2000s would see these concerns seemingly quashed, thanks mainly to two properties directed by this man. It's finally time to talk about Hiroyuki Imaishi. He joined Gainax in 1994 as a key animator. He worked on Neon Genesis Evangelion and got a lot of attention doing so, and immediately made a name for himself with his directorial debut, 2007's Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, along with its sequel OVAs and compilation films. Gurren Lagann is the forever quotable and kick-ass giant robot anime that broke all the rules and was the opposite of Evangelion in tone, bursting with passion, hope, and optimism for the future while breaking the fourth wall with abandon, and endless nods to super robot anime as well as Gainax's history. And in 2010, Imaishi followed it up with Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt, a raunchy, violent series drawn in the style of American cartoons and humor straight out of South Park, where two angels named Panty and Stocking transform their panties and stockings into weapons to fend off demons while making fun of literally anything and everything. Highly irreverent and just the perfect time capsule of the 2000s. Seemingly, this was Imaishi was seemingly the guy who's going to be the creative force to save Gainax and bring it through into the 2010s. But in 2011, he left and formed the now iconic Studio Trigger alongside Masahiko Otsuka. And a vast majority of the creative staff at Gainax, because again, the animators through all of this had just been paid really just terribly. And just more of the upper management and office politics. A lot of folks like Anno were finally fed up. They left and they went to Studio Trigger. Basically, after it became very apparent that most of the staff and animators had defined Gainax in the 2000s were now over at Trigger. And this would be far from Gainax's troubles in 2011. The studio was sued by AD Vision for breach of contract regarding the license for a potential live-action Evangelion film that never materialized. That was a big deal. And 2012 and beyond were especially tough years for Gainax as a company slowly began what we now can see was its death spiral. Through it all, the upper management continued to incur many outstanding debts along with burned bridges, the staff exodus, and unpaid royalties just made Gainax a very unappealing business partner. And in 2016, Hideaki Anno had a very public falling out with Gainax leadership as he revealed his promised royalties from Evangelion had suddenly ceased with no explanation from President Yamaga. Additionally, Studio Kara had given GAINAX 100 million yen back in 2014 to basically bail out GAINAX from bankruptcy, which had also went unpaid with no communication as to why. Studio Kara sued GAINAX and won. But then President Yamaga published a letter which claimed that GAINAX had no capital to spend on paying back any of its debts due to the burden of restructuring the company, which was technically true if you can count slowly dissolving as a form of restructuring. The hits just kept coming and coming for GAINAX. It seemed like really like they were hardly producing anything, and the things that they were producing were only like a scant few manga adaptations here and there. But to help pay the bills, GAINAX had also sold off the rights to Gunbuster and Furikuri, without permission by the way, while also selling additional production materials under the table. The company was also establishing subsidiaries left and right, as well as independent offshoots, mostly from 2014 through 2016, this period. And these companies were named after the towns and regions that they were located in, also based in like rural areas where company leadership had originated from. So a couple of these was like Yonago GAINAX, which was a content production company headed by Takami Akai. We had GAINAX Kyoto, an animation company headed by Yasuhiro Takeda. From what I see, the main thing they've done is some web shorts, like Days of Urashima Sakatasen. You can see that on Crunchyroll. They've done mostly assistant works. Not really, they've not produced a full-on TV series or any kind of OVA or really any kind of series aside from that web shorts. GAINAX West was established in Kansai on Kobe's Anime Street in March 2016. This was headed by Yasuhiro Takeda, and this was an otaku goods store plus the host of a Gurren Lagann-themed cafe with the stated goal of developing into an animation company within 3 years. GAINAX West didn't last one, due to repeated scandals by the head of the Anime Street. Now, for once, I don't think this was actually GAINAX's fault. They just happened to be on an otaku goods store where the guy in charge was just not paying he's just not paying anything out to the city. It was supposed to be this big tax bring in, and he wasn't paying out. So this was closed and subsidized by the town in 2016. Bafflingly, GAINAX even entered the tomato business with GAINAX Marsh in 2016, which was located near Kobe and GAINAX West. Most notable of these is probably Fukushima GAINAX. This is a spin-off animation studio and museum established in March 2015, operated out of a converted junior high school building to take on overseas outsourcing work. But by December of 2015, it was announced that Fukushima GAINAX and the main studio GAINAX were now fully independent companies of the others. So Fukushima GAINAX had nothing to do with the head studio, and in 2018, they were acquired by Kinishita Holdings Group and rebranded to GAINA with a baffling studio logo for sure. GAINA has produced TV series The Forest of Piano and The Yakuza's Guide to Babysitting. They even announced sequel projects back in 2018, Uru in Blue, which is to be a sequel for the Royal Space Force, as well as Gunbuster 3, but I've not seen any major updates since 2018, but they're still listed on the company, so we'll see if anything comes out of that. Some less successful business outings that also involved establishing a short-lived CG studio, computer graphics studio. They even attempted to enter the restaurant business with themed cafes and such, and that quickly went under. Because again, these are guys with no experience at all in the restaurant industry and just deciding to throw money at things. During this time, the main studio GAINAX's output was almost entirely on adaptations. We have Medaka Box, The Mystic Archives of Dentalion, Stella Women's Academy. There was an original series in 2011 and then a full TV series in 2015. You have Wish Upon the Pleiades, as well as Magica Wars. But Magica Wars is based on a mobile game and PS Vita. It's more like a multimedia push. But in 2018, things just got to the point where GAINAX practically ceased as a production company. And so Hiroyuki Yamaga stepped down and was succeeded by a man named Tomohiro Maki. And Tomohiro Maki was coming from the GAINAX International, which was a subsidiary company for training voice actors. He'd also been a board director since around 2015. However, this tenure would be extremely short-lived. I'm talking December of 2019. Maki-san was arrested on allegations of indecent acts with a minor on an inspiring voice actress, and he was sentenced to, a year later, he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. So in the middle of all this drama, Yasuhiro Kamimura, you remember him? He established the Groundworks company, the guy who owns Evangelion store. He was brought in as the new company president in February 2020 to salvage what he could. Part of this would be selling the rights to Gurren Lagann and Panty & Stocking series to Studio Trigger. This happened in 2023, and then Trigger turned around revealing a sequel series, or announcing a sequel series, which is currently airing in summer 2025 at the time of this episode, is New Panty & Stocking, as well as re-releasing the Gurren Lagann compilation films to theaters. But all the things Kamimura tried were in the end not enough, and GAINAX filed for bankruptcy on May 29, 2024 with the Tokyo District Court and publicly announced the studio's closure on June 7th of the same year. GAINAX's trademark and materials were transferred to Kara, which has been steadily working through all the properties. And really, GAINAX had been dead for many years, but 2024 was the official end of the studio that had arguably shaped the anime landscape since its inception through the 2000s. And in the end, the story of Studio GAINAX is one of a meteoric rise and fall, both entirely on the backs of its leadership. But even though this may be a sad way to end the studio or end the rundown episode, we know the story of GAINAX lives on the successor studios, Gonzo, but especially Kara and Trigger in particular. And so I hope this episode on Studio GAINAX was informative as well as a good cautionary tale. But what do y'all think? What are some of your memories of Studio GAINAX during its heyday? And what are some of your favorite shows? Is there anything from this list that I mentioned that you would like to see me cover on the show? Let me know down in the comments on Spotify and on the episode. You can email us at anifieldguide@gmail.com or jump into our Linktree and follow us on all the different socials and jump into our Discord if you're so willing. Be a part of the community. Let me know how I'm doing and what would you like me to talk about next.